everyone, my name is Sahar Mirhadi, and today I will be presenting my research, Playing Through Tough Times, exploring the relationship between game aspects and coping strategies during difficult life challenges. So today I wanted to speak about the motivation for this research. This paper was built off of previous work by Iacovides and Meckler in 2019, who looked at the role of gaming during difficult life experiences. And I recognised when I started doing my PhD that there's a need for research on how gaming may affect players during tough times, and actually the specific aspects of those games that may support coping. And looking at previous work and previous studies, they haven't necessarily focused on the different aspects of the games and how they may relate to coping during tough times. So from there, we came up with two research questions to help with this initial study, which is: what aspects of the games do players find beneficial or detrimental during their life experiences, and how do these game aspects relate to coping strategies? The way we conducted this study was through an online survey where we surveyed 130 participants, asking them about their period of difficulty, what game or games they were playing during that time, and then asking them what aspects of those games did they find helpful or hindering during that period of difficulty. As you can see in the graph, we had a diverse sample of participants who reported a broad range of difficult life experiences. So from there, through our content analysis, we identified 269 segments that indicated a specific game aspect which participants either found beneficial or detrimental. Through an iterative process, 31 different game aspects were identified and then were categorized into the 6 categories that you can see. So challenge, social interaction, character interaction, environment, narrative, and simulation of real-world activities. Many of the game aspects that you see here were perceived as positive, so 197 in total, approximately 73%, although every category does also include instances of a detrimental impact. And from there, we conducted a cross-tabulation of the game aspects in relation to the 5 different coping strategies, so emotion-focused coping, avoidance, meaning-focused coping, social coping, and problem-focused coping. And for the purposes of the presentation, I will be focusing on the 3 highlighted areas, so challenge and emotion-focused coping, avoidance and environment, and meaning-focused and the narrative. So if we start off with emotion-focused coping and challenge, this was the highest co-occurrence in our data, reported across 42 instances. And here, players spoke about how games enabled more positive forms of emotions that perhaps they may have had few opportunities to experience in daily life. Games in this instance were viewed as a restorative activity, offering mastery and competence, feeling like they could accomplish something through in-game goals or their own personal goals, and having that sense of satisfaction that they had accomplished something. However, due to the complex nature of some of the game aspects within challenge, such as grinding rewards, for example, players also felt that there was a tension between an obligation to engage in these rewards, but also had the motivation to also engage in grinding and rewards to feel that they could have that mastery and competence. So in this case of Borderlands 2, our participants stated that as much as the repetition aspects were helpful, they could also get different outcomes. So just because they were doing the same thing, they were still getting that sense of accomplishment from the desired outcome and beating the level. Secondly, we then move on to avoidance, coping, and environment. This was reported across 10 instances. Games are being used as a distraction or avoiding dealing with the difficult life experience, such as sort of disengagement, escapism. And where we saw in the environment category, players were stating that they were escaping into a fantasy environment. They could be someone else doing something else, and they actually reported it as a beneficial impact. So whereas escapism and disengagement can be seen as a potentially a negative or a problematic behavior, here people were stating it more as a respite, as sort of a distraction from the situation that they were going through. So in the case of Skyrim, for example, one of our participants stated that the fact that Skyrim was taking place in a world very different from their own, meant that they didn't necessarily have to think about what was happening in the real world and distressing them. They could just focus about what's happening in the virtual world, and that helped them during a period of difficulty. And meaning focused coping and narrative. This was reported across 11 instances. In this instance, the coping is about how games allow players to engage in meaning making with respect to challenges they are facing. This was more about reframing, having a sense of reflection, and perhaps taking a new perspective on what they were going through the games themselves. In this instance, our participants spoke about how games provided a backdrop for players to understand their life experiences and get a new understanding. This was particularly prevalent in games with a strong narrative around care, determination, and resilience. So if we speak, for example, around Hollow Knight, in one of our participants said that they'd given them comfort when they were isolated during the pandemic. And one of the themes of the game is this idea of perseverance for adversity and difficult, uncertain times. And that really helped them to reflect on their own struggles to help them mentally relate with that through Hollow Knight. So just to conclude, just wanted to highlight some key takeaways from the research. So our initial study revealed how gaming can actually be really valuable in players coping during tough times. From the research we have identified, it is one of the first studies to identify game aspects that could be related to a variety of different coping strategies. We identified 31 game aspects, which we categorized across 6 categories, and highlighted that most of the game aspects that players said were predominantly beneficial. Not always. I think that was more of a wider conversation around the complex nature and nuanced nature of gaming experiences. What one game aspect is good for one player, maybe it's slightly different for another, and that could be to a variety of different contexts. And one thing that it's been highlighted is that games and these game aspects seem to support a range of different coping strategies. We saw the prevalence of emotion-focused coping through gaming in helping players have a sense of competence and mastery to mitigate some of the experiences they were going through. This idea around avoidance coping as potentially a healthy escapism, having a sense of respite and a break from what they are going through a virtual medium. And finally, we have the potential of gaming to facilitate meaning-focused coping and help players understand and perhaps reframe some of their lived experiences through gaming to help perhaps have a new perspective on the way they view the world. And finally, the notion that we probably do need some further research to explore perhaps how different types of video games may influence players' coping strategies and experiences to see if there's any differences in that way. And with that, I shall close the presentation.